What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with a preview for Week 5 of the NFL season. If you're new to this web series, essentially we'll go through each position on the DraftKings slate and we'll kind of talk about the most interesting players at each one. I'll try to point out a few little tidbits about guys that I think might be of note, and I'll show you some of the tools that I've built as we go along here. So, as we always do, let's start with the quarterback position. And again, this is the Thursday to Monday slate. So, unfortunately, we're not going to get New England, Tampa Bay on the Millie Maker slate. We're also not going to get the Sunday night game now, which is Kansas City, Houston. And we're also not going to get the Monday night game, which is Chicago, Minnesota. So, keep that in mind as we go through here. But I'm still going to try to talk about as many players as I can. Okay. Quarterbacks. So, unfortunately, you have to play the Thursday night slate to get access to him, but Tom Brady, again, we talk about Tom Brady a lot. We would say last week was a down week for Tom Brady, only scoring 23 DraftKings points, but the volume was there, the completion percentage was there. He just didn't throw enough touchdowns to be one of the highest scoring quarterbacks on the day. If we go to the game logs here, and again, these are all tools available on dfsondemand.com. I've created all these. And we look at who has faced Tampa Bay this year. You can see Mike Glennon scored 16 DraftKings points. Eli Manning scored 27 DraftKings points. And Case Keenum scored 31 DraftKings points. That is not a gauntlet of opposing quarterbacks. What do you think Tom Brady's going to do to these guys? So just keep that in mind. I know it's a short week, but that Tampa Bay defense is reeling right now. And it shows as their designation here against opposing quarterbacks, the second most DraftKings points per game. We're starting to get good Russell Wilson again, where he's running the ball. Let's check out his game logs real quick. 29 and 36 DraftKings points over the last 2 weeks. And this game on paper, like Seattle versus the LA Rams, 2 years ago, what would the total of this game been? Like 39, those two very formidable defenses, maybe the offenses, lacked a little bit, but LA's been really good so far through four weeks of the year. Russell Wilson starting to turn it on. This game, I want to make sure I get this right, has a 47-point total in Vegas, which is the third highest of the week. That's pretty surprising to me. And the fact that it's only a 1.5-point spread and the Rams are actually a 1.5 favorite indicates that both teams are probably going to be scoring a lot of points here. So we're getting good Russell Wilson. Vegas thinking very highly of this game, has me as a potential investor. Kind of a similar boat for Dak Prescott. This is buying into Vegas maybe a little bit too much, but I feel like I need to point this out. This Dallas game has a 52.5-point total in Vegas, which is the second highest on the slate. The only game higher is the New England-Tampa Bay game, which is Thursday night. So really, if you're playing anything besides the Thursday night slate, this is the game with the highest point total. Dak Prescott certainly going to benefit from his team scoring more points, or the implied total of how many points Dallas is going to score. And again, they're 2-point favorites. So 52.5 points with a 2-point spread would indicate what? I mean, these teams are going to score basically 25, 26 points each. That's a good place to be for Dak Prescott and $6,800. DeShaun Watson was pretty popular last week. I imagine he will continue to be again this week. The price is rising, but it's not rising fast enough. Just looking at his last 2 games, and even the game against on the road against Cincinnati early in the season, 17 DraftKings points. Deshaun Watson really finding his legs underneath him, learning at a very quick pace. I've been really impressed with him. And, $6,200 for a guy who literally has 30-point upside is going to be tough to find anywhere else. So I imagine his price is going to continue to rise, but I'm willing to invest in it while it's still on its way up. Jameis Winston. So a couple things here. New England has been really, really bad defensively. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. All right, let me get out of the way. So I'm just going to go quarterbacks against opponent of New England. So here are the game logs. So here you can see Cam Newton, 37 DraftKings points. Alex Smith looked like Joe Montana in week 1. Drew Brees did his, normal 25 points, and Deshaun Watson 25 points. So no quarterback has scored less than 25 DraftKings points against the New England Patriots yet this year. And now you get Jameis Winston, who has played pretty well. Here's Jameis's game logs. 21 and 29 DraftKings points over the course of the last 2 weeks. The Buccaneers are a team that throw the ball enough. Jameis Winston, he's only rushed it 6 times, but certainly capable of getting loose every now and then. And here's a team that is, let's see, 5.5 point underdogs with a 55 point total. They're probably going to be throwing throughout this game. So as you can tell, I like a lot of the Thursday options already. Unfortunately, if you're not playing that slate, you're going to miss out on them. But if you are, Jameis Winston should have your attention. Carson Palmer. Let me switch to my cheat sheet real quick. So this is my cheat sheet for each week. Let's see what we have here. I'm on quarterbacks. Let me show you something about Carson Palmer. Here we go. Leads the league in pass attempts, and it's not really that close. 17 more than the next closest guy, which is Eli Manning. So 17 pass attempts from Eli Manning down would cover the next, 54, 56? Call it like 6 or 8 quarterbacks. So that's how far ahead Carson Palmer is just in terms of volume. We can pull up his game logs here. They haven't been great despite the volume, but 25 points from a guy at $5,900 who's going to get a matchup with Philadelphia, who has struggled, right? The 3rd most DraftKings points to opposing quarterbacks. The good thing is what you're going to get from Carson Palmer, right? This is Carson Palmer. We've talked about this before, and he's a known entity. 36 pass attempts is the least times he's thrown it this year, and it's not even close. The other 3 games are 48, 48, and 51. So a sheer volume play against a really struggling defense against the quarterback position is usually a good combo for fantasy purposes. Outside of those guys, not particularly thrilled with a lot of options down here. You could probably get me on a little bit of Jacoby Brissett, but he might be a little too dependent on his legs than I would like. This one I did think was interesting. Joe Flacco. Don't get me wrong, it's not because of anything he's done this season that I'm interested, but $4,700 for Joe Flacco. Like, Joe Flacco is still a starting quarterback in the NFL that threw it 49 times last week for $4,700. So if you look at his peers, some of these guys don't even play. Like A.J. McCarron, $4,700. Brian Hoyer, $4,700. I mean, just look at the peers here. So strictly from a pricing standpoint, I haven't tried to make any lineups yet. But if you plugged in Joe Flacco in a good matchup against Oakland, and that game is what? That's a really low point total, 39 points. If you plugged in Joe Flacco at the quarterback position, I wonder what type of lineups you could make around him. And really, if he goes out and scores you 15 DraftKings points, you're probably not upset. If he throws you 2 touchdowns, he's certainly going to do that. So I think he's somewhat intriguing just because of where he's at on this slate. Running backs. I don't think I need to talk too much about these top guys. Go back and watch any other video. You generally know how I feel. Le'Veon Bell, absolute workhorse, who's going to get all the touches in a great matchup. Ezekiel Elliott, I think, is fine. Kareem Hunt, I believe this is going to be the toughest matchup to date. We talked a lot about Kareem Hunt last week, how his production of long runs might be unsustainable. I actually thought that the Week 4 game against Washington was impressive because he didn't snap off any of those long runs. Still racked up 100 yards, so they did keep him out of the end zone. It was his worst game of the season, which is still 19 DraftKings points. So, again, this is going to be another tough matchup for Kareem Hunt, but If he starts to settle into this $8,500 range and he can get you 19 DraftKings points without scoring a touchdown, I think that's really impressive. And that's the type of game that makes me more confident about him moving forward than him just snapping off a long 75-yard touchdown every single week, which we talked about last week was probably unsustainable. So going to continue to keep a close eye on Kareem Hunt. Very impressed with his game last week, even though it was his worst of the season. Todd Gurley just absolutely continues to shred. I have to point out real quick, it is very unusual that LeSean McCoy has not scored a touchdown yet. Okay, he has scored double-digit fantasy points in every game. He's averaging 15.5 fantasy points a contest, and he's not scored a touchdown. That's going to change, okay? And that's going to change in a big way at some point when he starts finding the end zone. I will be an investor when that time comes, okay? But here's the guy I really like. So here's the guy I'll probably be the most overweight on, and it's Leonard Fournette. And really, you know, we've talked about him before, but let me show you a little something here. So I have this sorted by touches. So this is rush attempts and receptions. So anytime, obviously, a running back touches the ball. Le'Veon Bell leads the league, 104 touches. Right behind him with 93 is Leonard Fournette, and he's $2,500 cheaper. Right in between Ezekiel Elliott, who's more expensive. LeSean McCoy is more expensive. You actually see Carlos Hyde on this list. Could be interesting. But Leonard Fournette, we've talked about, runs so violently. It's really incredible. The guy, like, contact does not stop this guy. He falls forward every single time. He's dominating the touches, not on just for his team, but very close to the league leader. And he can catch the ball out of the backfield. So really, really good stuff from Leonard Fournette at $7,000, going up against the Steelers, who have allowed, let's see here, the 4th most DraftKings points against opposing quarterbacks. He did pop up on the injury report this week. Keep a close eye on this, but I don't think we've talked about it yet this season. This injury designation on DraftKings impacts the general public so much. They avoid these guys with designations. So if we get news later in the week, hey, Leonard Fournette popped up on the injury report, but he's going to play, no problem, whatever. No reason to not fire him up. It's going to drive his ownership down because of all these little red injury designations next to his name. All right, a couple of quick hitters here, and maybe these guys are flyers. Jordan Howard, I obviously do not like the matchup against Minnesota, but with Mitchell Trubisky under center, I wonder if the Bears will opt to lean a little bit more on Jordan Howard, right? Sometimes we see that with young quarterbacks. You know, you don't want him having, you know, to throw 50 times, especially against a tough Minnesota D. Maybe they rely on Jordan Howard a lot as long as this game is close. Doug Martin activated. This Tampa Bay situation, again, it's a Thursday night game, sorry. The running back situation in Tampa Bay hasn't been great. Jacquizz Rodgers, you know, hasn't been anything spectacular. Possible that if, you know, Doug Martin breaks one off or they just ride the hot hand here. So I wouldn't invest too much, but I think he's a decent flyer if you want to go contrarian, especially hasn't played the first 4 weeks of the season. I doubt a lot of the public is going to be on him. $5,000 for Lamar Miller, who is going to threaten 20 carries and basically have over 20 touches every single week. Is a pretty good price. He finally had that breakout week last week where he caught a touchdown. He ran for a touchdown, 29 DraftKings points, and his price only goes up $500. Wendell Smallwood is a guy that we talked about last week. You know, overshadowed because of that LeGarrette Blount. You know, what was it, like a 65-yard touchdown or a 65-yard run, and then kind of ate up a lot of the workload for Wendell Smallwood. I'm still optimistic about this guy, and you can see, I mean, 6 targets, 10 carries. I think he probably starts to see more than 10 carries every week now that Darren Sproles is out, but he's also taking on that, you know, that pass-catching role. He actually did find the end zone last week, so salvage, you know, 10 carries for 34 yards, ended up with 17 DraftKings points. I'm still fairly optimistic for him moving forward. That's probably it at the running back position. If CJ Prosise didn't suit up, let's look at that Seattle running back situation. McKissick, who, you know, 4 carries, scored 2 touchdowns last week, I guess would be interesting, but reports are right now that Procise is probably going to suit up there. So not thrilled with the Seattle running back situation. All right, wideouts. You probably know how I feel about the studs here. Always a big Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown fan. Guys are usually matchup proof. I think AJ Green is matchup proof, but I don't think Andy Dalton is matchup proof, which is the problem with Andy Dalton. Buffalo's been real troublesome for opposing quarterbacks this year, which is not going to bode well for AJ Green. Jordy Nelson is probably the most interesting. So we talked about that high point total. Basically, every game he plays, he scores at least 20 DraftKings points. He's $8,100, which is expensive, but he's not the most expensive quarterback or wide receiver on the slate. But he certainly could be the highest scoring wide receiver when this day is done. So I think that's worth an investment because he has the upside to be wide receiver 1 come Tuesday morning for only $8,100. I've talked about Mike Evans every single week. I've talked about Jameis Winston. I've talked about DeAndre Hopkins and all the targets that he's getting. Keenan Allen, ton of targets too. Okay, here's an interesting one. So here's Larry Fitz. So we talked about Carson Palmer. Larry Fitz, let's go back to the cheat sheet here. So this is now sorted by wide receivers and targets. Larry Fitz has the 3rd most targets in the league. So it makes sense, right? I told you that Carson Palmer leads the league in pass attempts by far. So who are they all going to? Well, the majority of them are going to Larry Fitzgerald. Dron Brown, pretty high on this list as well. Here, again, you are getting a great matchup with Philadelphia, but Larry Fitzgerald, despite the volume, hasn't always turned it into a big day. So I think you inherit a little more risk with Larry Fitzgerald and his targets. So let's look at this real quick. Larry Fitzgerald has 4 less targets than Antonio Brown. Which one of these guys would you want to play in a cash game? Clearly Antonio Brown, who has a higher floor. Larry Fitzgerald, much more of a GPP play because of his volatility. Could absolutely go nuts and have a week like he did in week 3 for 13 catches, 149 and a touchdown. Or he could see 7 targets and turn it into 13 DraftKings points. And that was with a touchdown. I mean, week 2, he saw 6 targets and had 5 points. So you can see the outcome of ranges for Larry Fitzgerald is much wider than a lot of his peers who have similar target numbers. DeVante Parker, we've talked about before. I'm an optimist here. Again, just so many targets. He's only found the end zone once this year, but has scored at least 12 DraftKings points every single week. Good matchup coming up. And then I thought there was, here's Jarvis Landry. So here's both Miami wide receivers. And maybe it's because they throw the ball a ton because they stink. But these guys are seeing a lot of targets. Let me see if I can hop back here. Here's Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry has 33 targets, but remember, they did not play week 1. So comparing that to all these other guys who have played 4 games already, the Dolphins have only played 3. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these guys. Again, 10 plus DraftKings points in every single game, still hasn't found the end zone. That's going to change. It's going to change. Alshon Jeffrey. This Philadelphia-Arizona game could kind of turn into a shootout. Wouldn't surprise me. You saw his name up here. Let's see. Where is he? Right, looking right past him, right here. 34 targets on the year. You can see that in his game logs here. Much like you, I'm trying to figure out what is going on with Will Fuller. So just joined the Texans. In the first game he plays with them, he goes out, he catches 4 of his 6 targets for 2 touchdowns. Obviously, it's unrealistic for him to continue scoring a touchdown every other catch, but when you have a guy who's new to a team and this is his first start, you wonder if there is some chemistry there with Deshaun Watson. Now, again, this is a game they scored 57 points. A lot of guys on the Texans scored a lot of points, but you're going to have to keep your eye on Will Fuller at $4,400 because if he does have some level of connection, if he is the apple of Deshaun Watson's eye, or at least enough for $4,400 worth of investment, it's going to be really interesting. So I'm going to have some exposure there. And then when you get down into this cheap, really cheap range, let's see if anybody is going to jump out at us here. And I'm not necessarily sure that they are. Yeah, it's pretty crappy down here, isn't it? Let's just check my cheat sheet real quick and make sure I'm not missing anyone. John Brown, we talked about, 4,500. Alan Hearns, yeah. I mean, once you get down below 4,500, really turns into a crapshoot. Yeah, okay. I probably wouldn't feel comfortable playing any of these players. And then we will wrap it up with the tight ends here. Sorry, this went a little longer than I expected. Look at all these red matchups here. Okay, let's talk about tight ends. Have probably talked about Gronk, Ertz, and Kelsey enough for the last couple weeks. Charles Clay, I think, is interesting. So here's a guy that I've liked for a few years, even back when he was with Miami. He's a very versatile player. He gets lined up in a lot of different areas. So sometimes you'll see him line up as like a fullback, and they'll run him out and kind of like out into the flat as one of his routes. Really versatile player who has a nose for the end zone, and that's kind of what you're seeing here in his game logs. Isn't going to get a huge volume of targets, but you can see he converts on a lot of them. Very athletic player, 19 and 15 DraftKings points. I mean, he scored 15 DraftKings points in 3 out of the 4 games this season at $4,800 is a really good price. And then Evan Engram is probably someone I'll be a little bit heavier on. So let's go up here. Or, sorry, we'll go here. Targets for tight ends. Zach Ertz leads the league. Right behind him is Rob Gronkowski and Evan Engram. How about those 3 names as the most targets in the league? So, again, when we're looking just for volume, here's a guy who's $4,000 who, if he scores you double-digit 12, 13, 14 DraftKings points, you're probably pretty happy. 11 targets last week, did not find the end zone, and still scored 12.2 DraftKings points. He's young. There's going to be a significant learning curve. It's going to be a volatile ride with him. But, wow, all those targets, how can you overlook them? Then, as you can probably imagine, Cameron Brate against the New England Patriots, Jameis Winston. Yeah, clearly I'll have quite a bit of exposure to that game. There you go. That's it. That's the preview for Week 4. I'd love to hear who you guys are going to play, so tweet me. It's at DFS On Demand. Or leave a message below. Talk to you guys soon. Good luck.